I'm doing well, and so we don't confuse anyone tonight. There's a second Fitz on Cold Red, and it's a friend of mine for years named Bill Fitzpatrick. He's the district attorney in Onondaga County, New York, which happens to be the Syracuse, New York area. And he's been at this for probably more decades than he'd care to admit sometimes. Bill, welcome to Cold Red.
Thank you. I almost was doing, but I'm the other Fitz, as I like to call myself.
Yes, you are. And you've been doing what you're doing for a long time, and in an elected position as the chief law enforcement officer of Onondaga County, again, the Syracuse area. And
Right.
I spent some time there on a case. I know, Ray, you spent some time there doing work.
Mhm.
But tell us a little bit about your own upbringing and how you got even started to be a lawyer as well as now district attorney.
Well, law enforcement's in my blood, Jim and Ray. My dad, my late father, was a II veteran. He came back to Brooklyn and became a New York City police officer and rose to the rank of detective. And I can remember fondly, it probably would be frowned upon today, but I can remember very fondly that if on the rare occasions when mother wasn't feeling well or maybe had broken a bone or something, my dad would stick me and my older brother Barry in the back of a police car, drive around Brooklyn, and on occasion stick us in the back of the precinct, 88th precinct in Brooklyn. Kind of a tough neighborhood, and we would sit there, wide-eyed and just watch all the language and the cases, the interrogations, and it was an eye-opening experience for a couple of young kids.
And it scared you straight, I bet, as they say nowadays.
we we didn't get away with too much as kids, but I remember, Jim, when I was 11 years old, my dad gave me a book, Kidnap, not the Robert Louis Stevenson classic Kidnap, past tense, but Kidnap, and it was by a great author by the name of George Wallace, and it recounted the history of the Lindbergh kidnapping and how really, I think, a brilliant prosecutor by the name of David Wilentz, who was the Attorney General of New Jersey, put the case together. And maybe not for the first time, but certainly for the first time at such a large scale, he used forensic evidence. I mean, they convicted Hauptmann with the ladder that he left, a chisel that he left, and most importantly, in my judgment, with the ransom note that he left. And there was a massive hunt for the baby. Multiple police departments, FBI, which was a fledgling organization at the time. J. Edgar Hoover, of course, wanted to, be the one that saved the baby and caught the kidnapper, so that would be prestigious for his agency. The guy that ran the investigation, interestingly enough, was the head of the New Jersey State Police, and his name was Norman Schwarzkopf, which may sound familiar to people of our generation because his son was the commander of Desert Storm, General Stormman Norman Schwarzkopf. And a lot of criticism in hindsight of the investigation. I thought it was for the standards at the time. It was done fairly well, and eventually there was this really brilliant detective in NYPD that used, very similar to what you have done in your career, Jim and Ray, profiling. And he had identified an area where he thought the kidnapper was from in the Bronx. And sure enough, uh, not many years later, I think 2.5 years later, they caught a carpenter, a German immigrant by the name of Bruno Hauptmann. They found a $20 ransom note on him. And the way they caught him was a observant gas station attendant had gotten the gold certificate. Roosevelt took us off the gold standard. The ransom had been paid in gold certificates, and they were very noticeable. They're not gold; they're green. They look like currency does today, but you could see on the top it would say gold certificate because technically you could walk into a bank and demand $20 in gold. which wasn't going to happen. And they wrote down the license plate number, and sure enough, it came back in an area where this detective had postulated that the guy would probably reside. And then they put I thought, a phenomenal case against the guy together. But that got me hooked. That was the chum for me. And
I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop you right there, because if anyone doesn't believe me, go pick up my first book that I wrote, and
right.
it was that exact book, Kidnap, by Waller, that my father recommended to me, because my father and my mother were alive back then. Ray, I'm sure your parents were too.
Yes.
And they always talked about, to them, the case of the century was, and of course the little baby died the night of the kidnapping, but they didn't know that till about, I forget, 8 months, a year later, when the body was found on the property. I mean, it was a big property in Hopewell, New Jersey. So yeah, we could spend the whole episode. We're not going to do that. But you're only like the second person. I wonder how many books, or how many people, that book, published like in 1960 or so, I got from the Philadelphia Free Library. And I read it in the 3 weeks that I had to. It was the first adult book. I don't mean, graphic stuff, but the first book written for adults that I ever read. And I think subconsciously that encouraged me to get into my career in law enforcement. But Bill, we're here to talk more about you. So obviously you continued school, somehow law school.
I went to Severian High School in Brooklyn, and a teacher of mine, I was going to go to Georgetown, had a nice scholarship offer there, and teacher of mine, Bernie McQuillan, God rest his soul, he said, there's a couple of guys here from Syracuse that would like to talk to you. And I hadn't even applied to Syracuse, and I wound up going to Syracuse University, and I did undergrad in law school in 6 years. Most people, I wouldn't take a year off or whatever. I wanted to get it done as quickly as possible. And my intent, Jim and Ray, was to go back to the city and work there. I got a nice job offer from Mario Marola in the Bronx, but I wound up taking a job offer in Syracuse. The office was about 25 assistant DAs at the time. Now the office I run is 50 assistant DAs, and I got hooked. I impressed my bureau chief, and he gave me a homicide case a year and a half out of law school. It turned out to be a case of some significance because it involved a homicide that occurred on the Onondaga Nation, which is right in the middle of Onondaga County. And the jurisdictional issue went to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they affirmed the conviction. And they said that we did have jurisdiction over felonies that are committed on the Onondaga Nation. And it was a circumstantial forensic evidence case that I tried, and I've never looked back. I probably tried. I'm approaching 100. I don't know the exact number, but I've tried close to 100 murder cases since then.
I know Ray has some questions, but just real quick,
Bill
and I, we met 2012 perhaps on a certain case involving a black widow. That's a woman. Well, it's also a spider, but in human parlance, it's a woman who kills her husband. This woman tried to kill her biological daughter to cover up her killing her husband. And we're going to talk about that later in the episode. So that's how, it's want to let our audience know how you and I met. And we've been in contact all these years, never not in person. This is the first time sort of face to face on the podcast here. So Ray, you had a comment or question. Go.
I do. Bill, there's not a whole lot of people out there that spend nearly 5 decades in the criminal justice system, whether it's as an attorney, as a law enforcement officer. And the question I have, when you first became a prosecutor, what did you think the job was about? And how has your understanding evolved over the years?
Oh, that's a great question. As a young man, in my mid-20s, I thought it was a competitive area, where you got to win and, get the conviction and, get a long sentence and everything. And aside from the tactical means that we use to solve crimes today, what changed most for me was that a prosecutor really has a multifaceted responsibility to his or her community. And I like to say that prosecutors are the only profession in the world where we wake up every morning and try to think of ways to put ourselves out of business. And what I did, I took office in January of '92. I had been in private practice for 5 years before that, which I thought was a good learning experience for me. Also made a lot of money. But when I took office, I immediately started a drug diversion program, which was very controversial at the time in '92, especially in somewhat conservative upstate New York. A lot of the cops said, "Have you lost your mind?" And we developed a system. New York had what were known as the Rockefeller drug laws, and they were draconian. You could get 20 years for selling a gram of cocaine under the Rockefeller drug laws, and you could get 15 years for cutting someone's eye out. So that didn't quite make sense to me. So we developed that, and then we moved on from there, from drug diversion to we have, for example, mental health courts, opioid court. You know, what's an opioid court? Well, it's if drug court is the hospital, opioid court is the emergency room, and we have a veterans court, and we deal with people that have specific problems and try to divert them out of the criminal justice system. So that was the most significant thing for me, Ray, to realize that a prosecutor's job is to do that elusive thing called justice. And I tell my prosecutors, if you wake up every morning and do the right thing, I will back you till the ends of the earth. And it's easier said than done. But I say that, and I always say, especially when no one's looking, do the right thing, try to do justice. And ultimately, our primary responsibility is to care for and protect our victims and get them some sense of justice. I never use the word closure. I think it's a dumb word. If you ever lost a child or a loved one to a homicide, to suggest that there's be closure, I think it's just a silly way of dealing with the tragedy and the horror of losing someone you care about.
You said you're upwards of 100 cases you've tried. Can we go back and talk about at least a few of them? There's one in the mid 90s or so. Is it pronounced Waneta Hoyt? Can you walk our audience through that tragic case of a number of young children being murdered?
Right.
Can you walk us through that? Or not? What do we do? Bill, you're frozen if you can hear us. We can't hear you and you're not moving.
No.
All right. This seems like a Wi-Fi thing again now.
Yeah.
Frustrating. Yeah, Bill, not sure if you can hear us, but we lost you.
There he is. He's on the phone.
All right, I'll try that. He's got...
Bill, you're frozen.
Why don't we come back and do this tomorrow? I mean, can you do this tomorrow?
Yeah.
I mean, I have something at from 4 to 6. I could probably be back by 6. I don't know if he wants to do that earlier. And I could push my 4 o'clock.
We should definitely, if Matt's listening, maybe do that sound check we talked about, and maybe we can do it in his office.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Do it earlier. If he has some time. And look, I'm wide open all day tomorrow. I don't know what your schedule